Hi, welcome. My name is Paul Fritz, and today we are going to get an introduction into Maya 2022. I did an introduction video to Maya several years ago. I think it was Maya 2016 that I demoed and kind of gave an introduction to. But Maya has changed quite a bit since then, and so does the way that I teach it in class now as well. I get a little bit more in depth right at the very beginning to give students more options and concepts, I guess, to be able to start with so that they can get more creative right off the bat. So that's what I'm going to do here. This video is probably going to be a little longer than my previous one, and I'm not really sure where we're going to end up at as far as how long the video is going to be. But I want to get in depth into using Maya, how to get it set up, some of the things about Maya, introduce you to the UI so that you can move around, get the screen to move, and do the things you need it to do inside the viewport. And then we're going to get into making a bug with very simple shapes so that you can kind of start associating shapes to objects that you want to model. And you can kind of start seeing those shapes in those models or in those real live objects that you're going to model. So that's what this is going to be about. And we're also going to play a little bit with some textures and some of the tools in Maya as well. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so right here, Maya 2022, we're just going to double click and get that open. And this may take a second or two depending on how fast your machine is or the other processes you might have happening on your machine while you're trying to open Maya. So while that's coming up, I do have the project that we're going to kind of end up with. We're going to end up with a bug. In this case, I have an ant that I've drawn right here, or drawn that I've modeled right here, and it's on a flat surface. So that's nothing more than a plane. And it's just some basic simple shapes that we've modified just a little bit to, we've kind of stretched them and deformed them a little bit to kind of give us our general ant shape here. And we're going to get into how we're going to do that. And then we're also going to learn about putting these textures on and how to give it a three-dimensional appearance using textures. We'll start with some simple materials and then we'll get a little bit more complex and do something along these lines here. And we're going to use Arnold to do our rendering. We'll put a skybox, or in this case a sphere, into the background. This is an Arnold dome that we put in, the sky dome. It gives us this view back here. All right, so let's see where we're at here. Okay. So Maya 22 is now open, okay? And with it open, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about just sort of the layout of Maya in general. Okay, so right up here along the top, you'll see a bunch of different tabs. That's what these are, tabs to different tools inside of Maya. And there are these drop-down boxes that pop up. And this is just one set of those tabs or tools. This is set for modeling right here. So if you see right over here underneath File, and of course File has all of your basic stuff that you find in File. So does Edit. Edit has a lot of undo, redo, cut, copy, paste. Then we get into keys, deleting, and different things like that, and we'll talk about some of those things. We can create from here, so we can create different objects and shapes. There's a selection process, the modify, display, and windows, and we'll get into some of these things and some of these different tabs here. And then after Windows, everything to the right of Windows is specific to the mode that we're on inside of Maya. And in this case, right here, we're in modeling, okay? Now, if I hit the down arrow next to it, you'll see that we have different drop downs that we can choose from. We have rigging, animation, special effects stuff, FX, and rendering, and then we can also create some custom tabs as well. So, or we can customize the ones we have here. So let's go ahead and just take a look. So if I click on rigging, for example, you see everything after Windows to the right has now changed. So I'm talking about a specific tab up here and you don't have it, this is where you want to go. You want to check to see what mode you're in for Maya and see where we're at. And since we're mostly going to be working, we are going to be working with modeling this entire time. We'll do a little bit with rendering, but we will not jump into this tab for that. So this lesson, we're going to stay in modeling. Okay, so that's kind of the top there. If we go all the way over to the right, you see that there's a workspace, and it's called Maya Classic here. That's what this viewport, this whole window actually that we're in, is set up as Maya Classic. If we drop down, you'll see that there are some different Windows setups or workspace setups that we can change to. So if we select standard, you'll see that it changed quite a bit. It opened up my modeling toolkit onto the side here, the attribute editor in another tab. We'll talk a little bit about those later. And then the hierarchy disappeared over here, or the outliner rather, which is kind of like hierarchy. And you can take a look at some of these other ones. Expert pretty much clears everything off. And that's because in Maya, you don't necessarily need to use these tabs or these little window ports to be able to work. You can hold the space bar and bring up every single one of those same tabs right here and work from this, okay? And you can also customize all these different windows. But we're going to start off here. We're going to stay in Classic for now, okay? Some of the other things, along here, along the top, next to where it says modeling, we have some quick buttons that do some specific things for us. Of course, you have, open scene, save, open scene, new scene, open scene, save, undo, redo. And then we get into some specific things for Maya, snap grids and things like that. These little separators right here, if they have an arrow next to them, we can click on it and you'll see that there are additional buttons that are hidden inside those arrows, and these happen to be things for working with some other aspects of Maya that we're not going to get into today, so we can go ahead and hide that back down. And then ones that look like this are ones that are expanded, and you can see those tools here. We have some additional information here. Symmetry is turned off. We're not going to get into symmetry this time. We will do a little bit with some of these buttons here. There's a render settings. I may open that and show it to you, and we're definitely going to play around a little bit with Hypershader when we start working with some textures. And then right here, this tells you who is signed in. So this is my license for Maya. And then right along the top here, if you look on the left, you can see the type of version of Maya that you're using, and also what project you're working on. Right now, we haven't created a project. And right up here, you see we're using Maya 2022. If you're using a student version, it'll say student version or education version up here. Okay, all the way back to this, all the way to the right, these are some quick buttons for some of these tools that are here on the right-hand side. So like the channel box. The attribute editor is open right now, and you notice this is highlighted blue. That's because that corresponds to this tab. If I choose the channel box tab, you'll see that it pops over to these little stack of papers. They look like a stack of papers. And then your modeling toolkit, which is this one right here. Okay, I'm going to jump back to the attribute editor because that's something we're going to use this time. All right, as we move down here, this right here allows you to turn on and turn off some of the different things in Maya. So, and actually what it does, I'm sorry, is it actually shows you which tab you're on. So you could conceivably get rid of these tabs here if you wanted to clean things up, and if you left this, this would allow you to get to the different tabs that are here. So right here, if we go back to the poly modeling, that's what the tab is on. You see all these orange ones. This is where we're going to start with. We're going to stay in poly modeling, but if you click on these different tabs here, these are different tools and buttons that you can set up, and you can customize these as well. And rigging, animation, rendering. We will take a look at Arnold a little bit later. Here's a custom one that's empty that you can add things to. So anyway, we'll get in more into Arnold a little bit, but we're mostly going to work here in the poly modeling this time. And then these are your shelf settings. You can come in and create a new shelf. You can delete a shelf. You can load shelves if you've already built some shelves that you want to add into a new project. And then you can also save them. We're not going to get into some of those details, but just so you know that Maya is very customizable. All of these different windows, you can also grab them and you can pull them out. And once you do that, This allows you to be able to work with it. You can set it off to the side, and you can have multiple window menus open that allow you to do different things. Then if you want to plug it back in, you can just kind of move it over to where it goes. And right now that one wants to pop up there. That's not where I want it. If you hover over, you see where it turns blue there, it'll pop it back in there. And then you can also size them. You can resize everything. So that's kind of the way that these will work. You'll have different windows that pop up. You can either decide to dock them. You can keep them separate. That's really up to you. If you ever get everything all messed up or you lose something, you can come up here to Windows and then go into Settings and Preferences. Let's see here. Let me see. Workspaces. There it is. Go to Workspaces and then come down here to Reset Maya Classic to Factory Default. So if I were to pull everything out of here and kind of mess it up a little bit, and then I decided I wanted to put it back, but I didn't want to mess with it, or I couldn't remember how it went, or I'm missing some windows, I can go back to Reset to Factory Default, and it'll put everything back in here. And it has hidden my outliner, which is a hierarchy again. So we'll talk about that a little bit now, how to get that back. Over here on the left-hand side, there are actually a couple different ways to get it back, and I'll talk about that. But over here on the left-hand side, this is the select arrow. You can see that's what my arrow is right here. This is a selection tool that works as a lasso. This is a paint tool, which you can't see much happening now, but it paints vertices and does a selection that way. This is the move tool. So if I were to have an object in here, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. It's probably easier to see this if I bring this in. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit a cube right here. And here's my selection tool. Right now, if I were to, I can do a click on it, it'll select for me. I can right click, go back to my object mode. So by holding down your right mouse button, it brings up this window. And I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but since I just did it in front of you, I wanted to explain it to you. And these are different modes that will put our object, or do something to our object here, as far as how we can interact with it. And then there are some additional menus down here of things that we can do to that object. All right. So with that, now let's go ahead and take a look at the lasso selection. I could do a lasso selection, and actually I need to be in the vertices. So I can do a lasso selection and select vertices using the lasso, so I could have this kind of, just kind of do a little shape like that. With the paint, I can select my paint, and it's very, very small right now. So if I hold the B key down, B as in boy or Bravo, and then hold it down and left mouse button and drag my mouse left and right, it makes this bigger. So my selection area can become larger. So now I can paint over and select all these different ones as I wanted to. Okay. All right. So now move. Let me go ahead and go to move. Let me go back to object mode first. So with the object mode, with it in move, I can grab the object and I can move it around. Okay. I can also grab individual pieces like this vertice. I can click on it and I can move those individually. And this is how we can deform and shape these into other shapes that we want them to be. Okay. And I can also use the lasso tool to select multiple ones if I wanted to. And then go back to my W tool. Now, move tool. If you hit W on your keyboard, if you hover over it, you'll see that these little windows will pop up, and you can hit W to get your move tool. Okay. Now there's also a rotate tool, and what that does is that'll rotate the object, and you can also rotate vertices and edges. So in this case, I'm going to select an edge this time and select an edge, and I can rotate the edge, which really won't do anything. Let's do a vertice, or just do a face. So a face, we can also select a face. And we'll get a little bit more into what these are on the model here in a minute. But you can see that I can deform the shape. I can shape the faces whichever direction I want them to go by using the move tool for that as well. So I can move the object as a whole, and then I can move individual pieces as a whole. And then this is the scale tool, and using the scale tool will scale the model larger or smaller. And again, we can do the same thing with individual faces. edges and vertices work a little bit differently with it, and we'll get into that as well as we move forward. Down here on the left-hand side, again, let's just talk about this real quick. I'm sorry, all over the place. This is W key. So if you hit W, it moves to the move key, and you can see that when I hit W, it goes to the move. When I hit E, that's rotation. So W as in whiskey, E as in Edward or Echo, and then the scale tool is R, okay, R as in Romeo, okay, or Rick, or whatever you want to think about. Anyway, so those are the quick keys, W, E, and R. You're going to use those a lot as you get more into modeling. Can't remember what it is, you can always come over here, hover, it'll tell you what it is, or you can just click on the actual button itself. Now down here, this is the viewport that we're looking at right here, okay? So this large area is the viewport, and you also notice in the viewport we have some menu items inside this viewport. We'll talk about that eventually, and also these different tools down here do different things for us as well that control inside this viewport. Alright, so if I click on this first one, nothing happens. That's because that is what view that we are in right now. If I click on this next one, you see it goes to a quad view, and each one of these has a different perspective view or a different orthographic view for these three, and this one's a perspective view, and you can see that right here. It says perspective down here. Then it says top here. It says front down here and side down here. So these are orthographic views. Now a perspective view allows you to kind of rotate around the model, look at it from all different angles, but just like in real life, you can have problems lining things up or seeing the way something actually looks, if it's square or if two pieces are lined up the way you want them to be or in the right spot, because in the perspective view, it sort of gives you this optical illusion that things are lined up based off of, they could look like they're lined up and look like they're right on top of each other, but they are not. And we can see an example of that real quick. If I put a cylinder in here, I'll just do this real quick. And then I put another cylinder in here. Now we can see that it's lined up here by looking at these other ones, but I can push it back, change my view here. And I'm trying to stack it on top of it, and you can see that it may look like I am actually on top of it. I might be able to just get it lined up just like that, right? Now we know that these are supposed to be the same size, so it's obviously not going to work for that trick, but if we made it bigger, now they look like they're probably lined up. But we can see in the other window ports that they are not. In fact, we are way off on them. So that's the difference. Using perspective is good. It's quick. You can move around. I use it a lot when I'm modeling, but when I'm trying to make sure I'm getting things lined up to scale, in the right position, I want to compare it to maybe a reference image I'm using, it's best to do that in one of these other orthographic views. These are orthographic views, and they give you the reality of position and scale inside of your modeling area simply by looking at it from different angles, your top, your front, and your side views. Okay, so that's that. Now, another thing you can do is you can also click here and you can change it from those 4 smaller screens to 2 large screens, and you can change these. So say here I wanted this to actually be my top screen instead of it's a top view instead of a side view or front view like it shows right here. So if I go to panel and I go to my orthographic, I can choose my top menu and change this to top. That's one of the things we can do with these. Now you see perspective here, that's this view here. We can change it so we have 2 different perspective views if you wanted to. You can create a stereo camera, which I don't really get into all that much. Orthographic gives you different choices, and you can also add additional orthographic cameras. We may get into that as we're working with the bug, so we may get into that. And then there's some other things we can do inside of here that we're not going to get into this time around. All right, so that's those views there. You can also customize the views as well. Go into Windows, and you can choose all of these different things in here that we talked about up here for your modeling, your standard, animation, rigging, etc. So what else? Bring the hierarchy back, or the outliner. Okay, in Maya it's called an outliner, and this is basically the place where you put it. You can click it here. Another way to jump around with all of this is on these different windows is you can hit the space bar. Wherever you hover over and you hit the space bar, that's the window that will be focused on. Okay, and since I switched it to 2 port, it's going to go back and forth between the two. I can go to 4 and I can just hover over any one of these other ones and it will bring those back for me. Okay, that's kind of a start. Now let's take a look at the hierarchy real quick. Here in the hierarchy, we also can control what we can see and what is shown here in our displays. And we'll get into these menus maybe sometime in future courses. But here in the window, you see it says perspective, top, front, and side. Those are our cameras, and that's what this shape indicates on the left, is that these are cameras, okay? And they are grayed out, and that's because these are what's known as hidden. Okay, so you can't accidentally grab one and move it. And they're so far out right now that you won't be able to see them. But I can demonstrate that with this funky cube we got going on right here. Okay, this is a poly. Okay, polygon. So if every time you have a different object put into Outliner, it'll have a different image here to the left for quick references to what it is that we're working with. Okay, so geometry. Okay, and if I select this cube and I hit Control H, so Control H as in hotel, you can see that here, it now makes it so that it's hidden. I can't see it anymore, okay? And it disappears here, okay? It's still actually physically there. I can click on it and it'll show that it's there. I can move it around and you can see in my other screens it's outlined. Well, it's actually not outlined. That's the little gizmo. So this is the gizmo, our X, Y, and Z gizmo here. And this gizmo shows you what you got selected, okay? But you can't see that anymore. Now, in order to bring it back, Control Shift H will bring it back. You can also go into display and show, and then it will either, you can go in here and you can show the last thing that you hid. You can show everything. And conversely, above that is hide. You can also hide selection and do various things with those as well. So if you can't remember the quick keys, remember it's up here in display, show, and hide. Okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit about that gizmo. And if I move it up and down, it basically faces or shows all the different directions. It shows X, Y, and Z in our scene for the way that this is oriented. Right now, it is set to the world. A little bit further on into the video, we may play around with this orientation based on object instead of world, but we'll start with it in the default position at world. Now, how to rotate the screen around so you can look at your model from different directions. That's probably what you wanted to get to. So if you hold the Alt button, the ALT button on your keyboard, and then left mouse click and hold it, you can rotate your screen around, okay? So that's with the left mouse button. If you hold the Alt button down still and use your middle mouse button, you can pan left, right, up and down, all over the place. And then with the right mouse button, so if you hold the Alt button down still and right mouse button click, you can zoom in and zoom out, okay? You can also use your middle mouse button, because it's best to use a 3-button mouse when you're working with Maya. You can also use your middle mouse button to zoom in this way as well. This does a rapid zoom in, and you may find that as you get closer to your object, you can't get as close as you wanted it to. It just depends on your sensitivity of your mouse and how you have things set up. So by using the Alt button and the right mouse button and moving your mouse left and right, you can control how fast in you zoom. It's much more precise. So after you get in there quickly using the middle mouse button, you can use the right mouse button to do that. Okay, so that should get us started, I think. There's a lot more here inside of Maya, but as we move along, we'll talk about that as we start our project. That should be enough to get us started to be able to start doing our project. I haven't gotten into these to the channel box yet, or the attribute editor. And the attribute editor is actually what we're going to use. I may have said channel box earlier. I meant attribute editor. Attribute editor is going to be something we're going to use for this project. Okay. And again, if the screen isn't big enough for you on whatever you're working on, you can always tear these tabs off, minimize the other ones. The way to minimize these as well, you can leave these tabs and jump into them when you want to, simply by clicking on the tab that's open, and it'll shrink it down. And the same with the outliner. So that kind of increases your work area. The tabs are still there, so you can quickly get to them if you need to. But they're out of the way as you're working. I'm going to go ahead and leave mine open for now. You don't have to. It's whatever you want to do. All right, so how to get rid of objects inside the screen. There's a couple different ways. We can click on it here in the outliner. And if you hold the shift button, if you click on the top one and you want to hold the shift button to go down, you can select everything within the distance that you've selected. If you hold the control button down, you can select individually as you move along. Okay. And then you can also do a marquee select. So marquee select is something I'll use quite a bit. And what that is you, somewhere in the screen above and outside the area where you want to select, you put the mouse, hold down the left mouse button and click and drag. And then when you click and drag, you can select everything inside that screen. Okay. I'm going to delete these. We're not going to start with those. Okay, so I think what we're actually going to do is we're going to stop now. And in this video here, it's been almost 30 minutes for this video. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. And then there will be additional videos. If I went all the way through, this video would be 2-3 hours long, maybe longer. I do want to have you learn each one of these things for the beginning piece of it. The next video, we're going to start our model. We're going to make an ant. You can choose to make another bug if you wish. But in our next video, we'll make an ant and we'll go through the process of getting that ant set up in a model. If you like this video, please make sure to like it. If you want to see some of my other content, you can check me out at, I always forget which side it's on. So it's right there. Putting on the Fritz 3D visualization. If you like this, please subscribe to my channel. Like the video. I'll see you next time.